Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. It is a phrase that essentially means that the developmental stage of the individual is reflective of the developmental stage of the society or the civilization or the greater body writ large. It is an idea that has been largely put to bed through, through studying things. But just like a lot of old and discarded ideas, there is obviously a reason that someone came to that conclusion, and we're going to talk about trauma and expression in today's video. Because what is poetry if not expression? And how could we define an event like World War I for the human experience, if not trauma? So there are some interesting things going on with literature and this era. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where literature lives. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion which comes to us from the era of World War I. This video will be in the poetry discussion playlist, now over 850 videos strong. We're cruising towards a cool 1,000, wouldn't you know it? The poem in question today is I Have a Rendezvous with Death by Alan Seeger, and it reads as such. I have a rendezvous with death at some disputed barricade. When spring comes back with rustling shade and apple blossoms fill the air, I have a rendezvous with death when spring brings back blue days and fair. It may be he shall take my hand and lead me into his dark land, and close my eyes and quench my breath. It may be I shall pass him still. I have a rendezvous with death on some scarred slope of battered hill. When spring comes round again this year, and the first meadow flowers appear, God knows 'twere better to be deep pillowed in silk and scented down, where love throbs out in blissful sleep, pulse nigh to pulse, and breath to breath, where hushed awakenings are dear. But I've a rendezvous with death at midnight in some flaming town, when spring trips north again this year, and I to my pledged word am true. I shall not fail that rendezvous. So, you may have seen the next poem that's going to come up here. What I contend in this poetry discussion is this. World War I changed poetry. I think that's fairly obvious if you just kind of go along the timeline of important poems. Something changes around the 19 teens, and poetry's not really ever the same again. But I do think we can illustrate this very well with this poem. This poem is stuck between the eras. It is a poem that is neither here on this side of World War I or there on the other side of World War I. This is a sort of mule poem of the two eras of poetry. The idea of fate, right? I have a rendezvous with death. The idea of fate is something that goes back in poetry since the very inception. It goes back in storytelling to some of the oldest stories that we can tell. This idea of fate, that something was destined to happen. It had to happen. It was going to happen regardless of what actions you took. That is what essentially fate is. It goes it appears in some of our earliest stories. It appears in some of our earliest mythologies. It appears in some of our earliest poetry. Sappho wrote about the idea of fate. That rendezvous with death is nothing if not fate. In fact, a rendezvous with death would be a very good working definition of what fate is. But World War I and post-World War I poetry accepted heavier doses of absurdity than were previously sort of accepted into the literary canon, sort of accepted into the ideas of what was poetic. If it was absurd, it was just fate, right? So here's what I want to do. We have a pre-World War I idea of death and fate from The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And I'm not going to read the whole poem. I'm going to read stanzas 2 and 5. So this is about an ill-fated charge of a regiment towards a guarded post and just destruction of the people who were charging, right? Sounds a lot like what people were going through in World War I, right? Just being sent wave by wave into cataclysmic and undisputed death. So that is what is awaiting the Light Brigade here. This is stanza 2 from The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Forward, the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Stiff upper lip, head into the fire, regardless of some cataclysmic blunder. And then, stanza 6, I apologize. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honor the charge they made, honor the Light Brigade, noble 600. This is an idea of meeting fate, where fate will have you. You are ill-fated in this battle, but it matters not, because the battle must be fought. You are charging to sure death, and so you charge. That is the honorable thing to do. That is for God and country that you do. You are doomed, but your fate is waiting there for you. That is a pre-World War I type of idea from someone who is ill-equipped, heading into disaster. Well, I've got to do it. That's what we're told to do. I am the Light Brigade and I must charge. Okay, that is how pre-World War I fate was understood. Well, let's read another poem from Siegfried Sassoon, one of the trench poets. One of my favorite trench poems, They, by Siegfried Sassoon. So here, in one other thing that we have to acknowledge in this here. Forward the Light Brigade. You're being given orders. You're being told what to do, which is to march into the mouth of death. And you will do it with honor, by God. Okay, great. Now, They, from Siegfried Sassoon, a trench poet from World War I. The bishop tells us, when the boys come back, they will not be the same, for they'll have fought in a just cause. They lead the last attack on Antichrist. Their comrades' blood has bought new right to breed an honorable race. They have challenged death and dared him face to face. We're none of us the same, the boys reply, for George lost both his legs and Bill's stone blind. Poor Jim's shot through the lungs and like to die, and Bert's gone syphilitic. You'll not find a chap who served that hasn't found some change. And the bishop said, The ways of God are strange. This is the post-World War I idea of fate. Fate? You mean it was my fate to go into those trenches and be gassed by some other probable upstanding citizen that was forced to go into the other trench and do the gassing? That's fate? All because of what? Because we've been told, because some politician somewhere has it in his bones that there should be a war? That's the post-World War I idea of that reflection on authority. In the first one, you tell me to march and by God I march. And that's just your captain. That's just the person above you in rank. Here, we have Siegfried Sassoon, a poet from World War I, arguing against not a captain, not his superior, a bishop, a man of God. The end line here, the ways of God are strange. Here in World War I, we're arguing not just with authority, but what many people believe to be the authority of all authorities. You're arguing with God himself. So the idea of authority is gone. The idea of fate is gone because they have challenged death, fate, and dared him face to face. And the boys reply, none of us are the same. George lost both his legs and Bill is stone blind. There's no rhyme or reason to this. They're old buddies, one lost his legs and one can't see. Jim's shot through the lungs and like to die. And Bert's gone syphilitic. You'll not find anyone who hasn't gone through some change. Some fate, huh? Some idea of fate. This is not fate. This is absurdity. So you have the ideas of fate gone. You have the idea of both authority and religion gone. And then you get into these ideas from these poems of honor. And how can there be honor in something as indiscriminate, in wretchedness, as World War I? So in Siegfried Sassoon's They, there is an element of randomness in this poem, and there is an observation of hypocrisy from the establishment there. You have that hypocrisy, the ways of God are strange. But it seems that there is a stretch to call anything on this page fate. It seems that the term itself is dead, is gone, is no more. Clearly, the idea of fate expressed here is the idea of fate expressed in this poem, They, if there is any, is that it is not fair or just or meaningful, which is to say it's pretty nihilistic, pretty weak nihilistic. So that brings us back to the original poem here, A Rendezvous with Death. We have ideas of fate here. The rendezvous with death itself is fate. We have sort of ideas of God, right? But God knows 'twere better to be deep pillowed in silk. God knows it's better to be somewhere else. That's not praising God. That's not praising authority. And then let's read the poem one more time, because I think that with these ideas in mind, reading the poem one more time becomes sort of necessary. Remember, you're looking for a transitional period between fate being real and absurdity reigning supreme. You're looking for a transition between authority being necessary and authority being selfish. You're looking for a transition between these ideas of honor and the idea that there can be no honor in a world of absurdity. So those three things in mind, keep those in mind. I have a rendezvous with death at some disputed barricade, when spring comes back with rustling shade, and apple blossoms fill the air. I have a rendezvous with death when spring brings back blue days and fair. It may be he shall take my hand and lead me into this dark land, and close my eyes and quench my breath. It may be I shall pass him still. I have a rendezvous with death on some scarred slope of battered hill, when spring comes round again this year, and the first meadow flowers appear. God knows 'twere better to be deep-pillowed in silk and scented down where love throbs out in blissful sleep, pulse nigh to pulse and breath to breath, where hushed awakenings are dear. But I've a rendezvous with death at midnight in some flaming town, when spring trips north again this year, and I to my pledged word am true. I shall not fail that rendezvous. So, with those things in mind, where's the authority? Even death. Death does not come across particularly authoritative. It may be he takes my hand and he'll lead me into his dark land. It may be that I pass him by. There's no authority there. Nothing authoritative there. When does the idea of death or the practice of fate come into focus? It does not. It does not. That idea is cloudy and unsure. Again, it might take my hand, it might not. It might be that I pass him by. When we start talking about the point of death, it's, at some some disputed barricade. Maybe it is some other place that I have this rendezvous with death. I kind of know that it's in the spring, but that's all I really know. I don't have any real clarification on the fate aspect of this. The moment that fate comes into play, everything gets murky in this poem. Not like the Charge of the Light Brigade. Right there. Right there. That's where I'm going to die. Nor is it like They by Siegfried Sassoon. A lot of the boys haven't died yet. Their lives are just ruined. Right? So this poem is in between those places. We have even the Charge of the Light Brigade in the poem The Men Are Alive. In They, the men are in some state of distress. Here, in this poem, the speaker has a rendezvous with death. He knows not when. Has no idea when. This poem and these sentiments are stuck between two eras of poetry. The honorable, the fated, the authority-abiding pre-World War I poetry, and the, hey man, you can take it and shove it, post-World War I poetry. So being in between both of those eras of poetry, I hate to have to say it, it's kind of a bland poem. There's nothing definitive about it. There are no great images here. It is a poem that exists in a place of fog. It is a poem that exists in some middle era of poetry. Have you ever seen these evolutionary mules? Have you ever seen these evolutionary creatures that are midpoints between a creature being able to do one thing and a creature being able to do another? Very, very strange stuff. You've got land animals that have flippers. You've got sea animals that have to breathe oxygen. All of these sorts of things that seem evolutionarily disadvantageous. Just like this poem. Those in-between evolutionary stage animals, they are not pretty. This poem, I dare assert, is not pretty. Just exists. We can understand some of the sentiments herein, and they're worth communicating 100 years later. Yeah. Those animals who were in between evolutionary stages could survive. But eventually the better thing comes along and there is no use for that intermediary state. The better poetry came along. And this poem, it's not a bad poem. Kind of ugly. Kind of wishy-washy. It's not a bad poem. There's some interesting things to chew on in it. But I wouldn't say that they are particularly stunning. Because it was stuck in an intermediary state of evolution. That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. Dropping multiple videos every single week. There is poetry every Monday, and as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.